June 5th, 2009. Late evening, LaGuardia Airport, Queens, New York. A 70-year-old man stepped off a plane, rolling a luggage cart through the terminal. He'd just finished a film shoot. He was probably thinking about getting home, maybe a meal, maybe some rest. He had no idea. Federal agents had been waiting for him. They moved fast. He didn't run, he didn't argue. He just looked, as one reporter would write the next morning, haggard. They took him to the federal lockup in Brooklyn, and he spent the night in a cell. By the next morning, the entire entertainment world knew his name, and not for anything he'd done on screen. This was Anthony Borghese, stage name, Tony Darrow, the man who played Sonny Buns, the flustered, hapless owner of the Bamboo Lounge in Martin Scorsese's 1990 masterpiece, Goodfellas. The man who stood behind a bar while Joe Pesci's Tommy DeVito smashed a bottle over his head. The man who played a mob-connected club owner so convincingly that Scorsese himself told him, on the day of his audition, "Study what? You're a natural." And now here he was, in federal custody, charged with conspiracy to commit extortion, because it turned out it really wasn't acting. This is the story of a man who grew up in the shadow of the mob, built a legitimate career performing alongside it, and then, at the age of 65, made the one call he should never have made. It is the story of how a real neighborhood, a real lounge, and a real relationship with real wise guys shaped every frame of one of Hollywood's most celebrated mob films. And it is the story of how thin the line truly was between the character and the man. But here's the thing that gets under your skin. Tony Darrow didn't just play a mob-connected club owner in the movies. He had worked in the actual Bamboo Lounge. He had known the actual wise guys. The character Sonny Buns was based on a real person whose restaurant a young Anthony Borghese had worked in as a youth, and the mob family that had the lounge on lock. He'd grown up in their orbit too. So the question isn't why he landed that role. The question is, how did he ever think the real world and the real world were separate things? Here's what the history books almost never mention. The Bamboo Lounge wasn't just a movie set. It was a neighborhood institution with blood on its walls, and Anthony Borghese spent his most formative years inside it. He was born in Brooklyn in approximately 1938, not the polished brownstone renovated Brooklyn of today, East New York. A neighborhood where, as Borghese himself would later put it, most of his childhood friends ended up either dead or in prison. His father was what people in those circles called a connected street guy. He was in and out of jail throughout Anthony's childhood. The family wasn't starving, but they weren't comfortable either. And in a neighborhood like that, the men with money and power didn't wear suits and carry briefcases. They ran dice games at the social club. They loaned money at terms no bank would ever offer. They were, in the language of the street, wise guys. And as a kid, Anthony Borghese was part of that ecosystem. Not as a criminal. As a kid, he'd cut the game. When the wise guys ran their dice games, they'd bring young Anthony in to take his cut from the pot every time the dice rolled. $1 out every throw, he'd carry the money home to his mother. That was how the neighborhood worked. It wasn't sinister to him. It was Tuesday. But Anthony had something those dice game operators didn't have. He could sing, really sing. He had charisma, a natural ease in front of people, and a voice that filled rooms. While other kids from the block were gravitating toward the hustle, he was winning talent contests, working odd jobs, grinding his way toward a legitimate career on stage. He was, you have to understand, not trying to be a wise guy. He was trying to escape. The problem was, the world he was escaping kept showing up in the rooms where he performed. One of his early nightclub gigs came directly through his friend Paul Vario Jr., known in the neighborhood as Little Paulie. And Little Paulie's father was Paul Vario Sr., a capo in the Lucchese crime family, the man who ran one of the most powerful mob crews in Brooklyn. Paul Sorvino would later play him in Goodfellas as Paul Cicero, Vario Sr. got young Anthony booked at the actual Bamboo Lounge, located at 1931 Rockaway Parkway, at the corner of Avenue N in Canarsie, Brooklyn. A popular watering hole, mobbed up from floor to ceiling. The place where Henry Hill hung out, where Jimmy the Gent Burke held court, where Tommy DeSimone sat at a corner table. These were the real men, and Anthony Borghese worked there. He knew them. He knew John Gotti too. He'd known all these guys from the neighborhood since he was young. They treated him well. Keep that detail in mind, because in 1990, Martin Scorsese cast Anthony Borghese to play the owner of the Bamboo Lounge in a film based on those exact men. And Borghese later confirmed what many suspected. Sonny Buns was based on a real person whose restaurant he had worked in as a young man. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because by the time Goodfellas came along, Borghese had already been performing for nearly 2 decades. He'd built a real entertainment career. He was voted the #1 nightclub singing act in Atlantic City. He was doing regular shows in Las Vegas. He starred in a revival of Pal Joey at the Claridge Casino Hotel. He called himself the Goodfella of comedy and meant it as a showbiz joke. Then came Street Trash, a 1987 cult film in which he played a gangster and even wrote and performed a song called "We Do Tings My Way." That performance was exactly what caught Scorsese's attention. Scorsese saw Street Trash and tracked Borghese down. He wanted him to audition for a role in his new film about the Lucchese crew, a film called Goodfellas. The audition is the stuff of Hollywood legend. Borghese walked in, and when Scorsese extended his hand for a handshake, Borghese waved him off and hit him with a profane, sharp-tongued brush-off. Scorsese loved every second of it. He reportedly broke into a wide grin and said, "You're perfect." When Borghese asked if he should study for the role, Scorsese reportedly told him, "Study what? You're a natural." And he was right. During filming, Borghese improvised lines that Scorsese said were often sharper than what was written in the script. The man played a mob-connected club owner because he had spent 20 years watching one, up close, from behind the bar. The film released in 1990 to overwhelming acclaim. It earned nearly $47 million at the box office on a budget of $25 million, and it is now considered one of the greatest films ever made. Borghese's role as Sonny Buns, the put-upon lounge owner bullied by Tommy DeVito, became one of the most recognizable supporting performances in mob cinema. And then came The Sopranos, where he appeared in 14 episodes as Larry Boy Barrese, a crime family captain. He also appeared in multiple Woody Allen films, in Analyze This alongside Robert De Niro and Billy Crystal, and in Mickey Blue Eyes with Hugh Grant. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Anthony Borghese had built a remarkable career playing criminals for a living, and that is precisely when things went wrong. The year was 2004. Borghese had a debt, $5,000. Not an Empire-level number, not a Lufthansa heist number, $5,000. Somebody owed him money, and that somebody wasn't paying. Now, a man who had spent decades watching how the neighborhood handled these situations had a choice. He could write it off. He could involve a lawyer. He could do what civilians do and move on. Instead, he picked up the phone and called in a favor from the world he'd always lived alongside, but never fully entered. He reached out to associates of the Gambino crime family. Specifically, he enlisted a Gambino soldier named Joey Boy Orlando and a mob associate named Giovanni Monteleone. Both men knew exactly what they were being asked to do. Tony Borghese drove to Monticello, upstate New York, a small town in Sullivan County. He took the two men to the debtor's house. He showed them where the door was. Then he stepped back. What happened next wasn't a polite conversation. The victim answered the door. Orlando and Monteleone beat him hard. By the time it was over, the man had a broken jaw and broken ribs. He'd been beaten in front of his own home over a $5,000 debt, because a character actor from Brooklyn had made a phone call. The FBI had been watching. They had it all. Wiretap recordings. One associate was captured on tape describing the whole thing without any apparent discomfort. So Tony meets them, shows them where the house is. They go to the house. The guy answers the door. They beat the living shit out of him. Clean and simple. No ambiguity. The FBI spent 5 years building the case. They were thorough. They were patient. June 5th, 2009. LaGuardia Airport. The agents were waiting. Borghese was taken into custody. He spent the night in the Brooklyn federal lockup and appeared in court the following day looking, by every account, rough. He posted $750,000 in bond, secured by his upstate home, and $50,000 in cash. He rolled his luggage cart out of Brooklyn federal court and told reporters, "I can't comment until I find out what this is about." He could not meet their eyes. Joey Orlando, the Gambino soldier who had actually carried out the beating, was already serving 33 months for a separate extortion conviction when the new charges came down. Giovanni Monteleone was released on bail and awaited his day in court. For nearly 2 years, Borghes's legal team worked the case. On February 9th, 2011, he stood in Brooklyn federal court and pleaded guilty to 1 count of participating in an extortion conspiracy. He was now a convicted felon. He faced between 33 and 41 months in federal prison under the initial plea terms. But Borges did something that surprised people. He filmed a public service announcement, a frank, uncomfortable, honest video in which he described what it had felt like to be arrested. It was shown in schools across New York. In it, he said, "When I was arrested, I thought I was going to pee myself." If you ever break the law and think you're a wise guy, you're not. The video made an impression on Judge Eric Vitaliano. It made an impression on prosecutors too. December 7th, 2011, Brooklyn Federal Court. Anthony Borghese, now 73 years old, stood before Judge Vitaliano and spoke directly to the court. "I know what I did was wrong," he said. "It's a terrible mistake. I will suffer for the rest of my life, and I deserve it." The judge looked down at the file in front of him, at the PSA, at the letters from youth groups, at the record of a man with no prior convictions who had done one very stupid, very real thing. The judge said, "The good that can be done and the good that has been done outweighs the harm that was caused." The sentence was 6 months house arrest and 2 years probation. Borghese would serve it at home. The man who arranged the beating would not be so fortunate. Joey Orlando received 51 months in federal prison. Giovanni Monteleone, who had done the physical damage, received 3 years probation in November 2013 and wept in court as he said he'd spend the rest of his life thinking about the man he'd hurt. The Real Bamboo Lounge at 1931 Rockaway Parkway no longer operates. The building still stands in Canarsie. Paul Vario Sr., the capo who first got young Anthony Borghese that booking, died inside a federal prison on May 3rd, 1988. Goodfellas had not even been released yet. Henry Hill, whose story Goodfellas told, cooperated with the government, entered witness protection, and died in 2012. Jimmy Burke died in prison in 1996. The world of the Real Bamboo Lounge has been gone for decades. What makes the story of Anthony Borghese different from so many others in this space is not the crime itself. $5,000, a broken jaw. These things happen in the criminal world every day. What makes it different is what it reveals. Here was a man who grew up inside that world, was pulled towards something better, built a legitimate career, worked alongside Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci and Woody Allen, played a mob-adjacent character so convincingly because he simply remembered what those men looked like up close. And then, at 65 years old, with all of that behind him, he made the one call that confirmed he'd never fully left the neighborhood. He told reporters once that playing a wise guy was as natural to him as breathing. He wasn't lying. The tragedy is, he didn't mean it as a warning, but that's exactly what it was. East New York shaped Anthony Borghese. It gave him the ear for dialogue, the body language, the instinct. It also gave him a Rolodex he should have thrown away. Most of his childhood friends ended up dead or in prison. He once said he used to wonder why God had forgotten him, left him behind when the neighborhood swallowed everyone else. After June 5th, 2009, we know the answer. God hadn't forgotten him. He'd just been waiting to see what Anthony would do with the choice. When it finally came, he made the wrong one, and he's the first to say so. If you found this story compelling, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every single week. Drop a comment below. Was Tony Darrow a victim of his own upbringing, or did he always know exactly who he was? Let us know.